So the war conflict fighting between Israel and Iran is continuing apace. I'm still disgusted by the whole situation, but frankly, Israel has picked a fight with an enemy who is not backing down. I've also seen on social media that we have videos of the Iranians saying, "My sons, they're all dead. My grandsons are ready to fight. If this is what it takes, then we're ready to fight." And they not necessarily looking jubilant, but at least looking very resolved to continue this fight. So I'm curious if Israel has finally really picked a fight with somebody that isn't willing to back down, and that this is going to continue, and that there will be devastation on both sides. I'm disheartened to see any wars anywhere, but this one in particular seems to be heating up, and neither side seems willing to come back to the table. And I think we had President Trump saying that we actually didn't have anything to do with this. So, Lucas, what's the update here? What do you know about what's going on between Israel and Iran?
Well, the most disturbing thing to me with this war is the amount of assassinations, the targeted attacks, the narrative of terrorism that has crept in.
We had two high-level Iranians that were or Israelis that were assassinated, right? In this,
I believe I believe two high-level Israelis were assassinated last night. Another Iranian military leader has been assassinated, and that's after that first salvo in which 3 were assassinated. I saw reports last night that the Ayatollah was targeted in Iran. So this narrative of terrorism, and let's also bear in mind that is how the war between Ukraine and Russia has escalated to a war of assassinations and terrorist activities, and Russia has acknowledged that and said it was going to respond in kind. But to keep it on Israel, so we have the targeted assassination aspects of it, which really, the assumption that you're going to decapitate the leadership and change the mind of 90 million people, to me, is bankrupt. So I hate to see that, because of the retaliation, and again, we've already seen the retaliation last night of assassinations in Israel. So you mentioned that the Iranians seem resolved to bear down in this fight and are not backing down. Trump was surprised at this. I mean, the last time we talked about it, we had just learned that the United States was making a cold calculation in the nuclear negotiations with Iran, and trying to lull them into leaving some of their military, and I didn't even mention the assassinations of all the nuclear scientists. I'm not even sure what the count on that was, but something like 12. So pretty, but Trump's calculation that was going to get rid of the hardliners in Iran and bring them to the negotiation table is absolutely wrong. And Iran has nothing to lose by firing its missiles into Israel. The other thing that I don't know if you've caught in the news, but Iran has said that Pakistan is prepared to fire one of their nuclear bombs into Israel, because Pakistan, there's a touchy relationship between Iran and Pakistan, but they are both Muslim countries. They share somewhat of an area that feels as if it's an autonomous region, Balochistan. But leading into this conflict, I was dreading this narrative of Tulsi Gabbard coming and saying the intelligence community has made the assessment that Iran is not trying to make a nuclear bomb, and the Ayatollah has declared a fatwa against the creation of a nuclear bomb. You know, that's all well and good, and that may be true, but it sets politicians up for an argument that is to which there is the only outcome is war. And so the concern that that the international community should have been voicing was, is this country open to inspections? And Iran is, and it's incredibly ironic to me that off the table in that discussion too, if we're focused on Iran achieving a nuclear weapon, then we're not talking about the nuclear weapons that Israel has and whether they're open to international inspections. And if we think about where this leads, if you have a country that has nuclear weapons and they're not even open to international inspections, and none of their politicians nor other politicians around the world will admit that they have them, then we have a big problem on our hands as they come up against Iran, who's not going to back down, because Israel is going to be put into a position where it's nukes or surrender. And the question I'm worried about now is, will they surrender, or will possibly Russia and Pakistan intercede and keep their finger off the nuclear option?
If Israel launches a nuclear weapon, this is pretty significant. I mean, we haven't really seen nuclear weapons used in a conflict. Only once on the entire planet? Is this going to be the second time? I mean, this would be international condemnation of Israel at that point if they did it, right?
Well, twice, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, both by the United States.
Totally, but was kind of lumping those two together as the United States being the only one.
Okay.
Sure. Yes.
Well, and yes, there would be international condemnation, but has there not been international condemnation with regards to Gaza?
There has, for sure. But I mean, maybe this is like a brand new condemnation. Could it get any worse? Maybe this is the thing that makes it even worse.
Well, part of the narrative of the Israelis is that they're Jewish and everyone is against them. So why not? And we see where that has led. There is no shame with regards to their actions in Gaza. So this is where my worries are. I should, many people say the Israeli regime, and I think they're right to point that out, because I certainly don't think that Israel to a man agrees with this. I know that there are intense political conflicts in the country with and a lot of it has to do with some of the
I haven't heard this side. Have we seen reports that there were protests that the Israelis are divided on this, that there's factions that are vehemently against this? Is there any way that Netanyahu actually gets thrown out of office over the Iranian conflict here?
I mean, the only thing that's keeping Netanyahu out of jail in Israel is the emergency situation that he is in a large part responsible for creating. Before the last election, or before the conflict with Gaza really ramped up, before October 7th, there were massive demonstrations in Israel, and they had to do with Netanyahu's packing of the court, and that packing of the court had to go towards his fear of the legal system as it was, finding his policies in fault, and also finding some corruption charges against him and his wife to be valid. So absolutely, I think part of the problem, though, now 2 years later, is that those who are left in Israel are his supporters, and I think that I'm not sure of the numbers on this, but I would imagine that many of the left in Israel have fled the country because they could see the writing on the wall as to where this conflict was with Gaza was going to lead, as it also spread into Syria, into Lebanon, into all of Israel's neighbors are Muslim, Islamic, and so picking a fight with them and saying, well, they don't allow, they don't like Jews, they don't like us here, was manifesting that reality. And I'd like to point out that I don't know that it holds true in Iran, and it's been part of Israel's sad history to itself bomb synagogues in its neighboring countries and then blame it on the regimes that were in charge there. So Israel has had a history of isolation, and that isolation reinforces their narrative and gives them righteousness in their cause. So that's a problem whenever they have a nuclear bomb, because if this isolation drives them, they're not going to take into consideration the blowback for what they're doing has for them in the future.
Do you know if this has changed the situation for Gaza at all now that Iran is fighting back against Israel? I guess Israel's fighting a war on two fronts, essentially.
I mean, that is mind-blowing to me, because no, it hasn't. Israel is not concentrating on Iran, but is still, I think something like 22 Palestinians were murdered as they were shot at a food aid distribution. I mean, I don't know how many details you're absorbing in what's going on with Gaza, but they're putting food. They have a policy of starvation. They created an agency that has a Orwellian dystopian name of the aid distribution group or something of that sort, and that aid distribution group has been charged with suppressing the amount of food that gets there, and then they put the food out, and when crowds of people come towards it, they shoot. They shoot 22 people who were starving, desperate for food yesterday. So no, they are still continuing with the violence against the Palestinians in Gaza. They're not focusing on Iran. I think that their jab at Iran was all about bringing Western powers into ratcheting up the level of conflict and relying on the bad relationship between Western nations and Iran in bringing others into the fray.
And Trump has said that the U.S. didn't have anything to do with this. So if Israel was trying to draw the U.S. into this conflict, it seems like Trump is not playing along with that, is not going along with that at all.
Well, this is where I've been confounded. Now, Trump, I mean, I was initially pretty angry with Trump. I mean, one after Israel attacked Iran with this targeted and also with this targeted attack, there was a presumption that there was a large amount of intelligence that was needed, and not just intelligence, but also refueling and support with regards to making that attack. And so I had an idea that the United States must have been complicit in some sort of manner. If the United States was not complicit, they were certainly aware of it. Immediately, or one of the first things that I saw afterwards was was a tweet by Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, and they said we had nothing to do with this. And then the next morning, I woke up to a tweet from Donald Trump, and he said I knew all about it. And I tried to warn the Iranians that this was going to happen unless they came back with a deal in 60 days. So he's known about it in the back of his mind the whole time. So I could not understand why the United States would, especially why would Donald Trump say that? I mean, and on one hand, why would the United States be duplicitous in their in their diplomatic relations, okay, they do that all the time. That seems to be de rigueur for the United States, if not other nations around the world. But then why would Trump admit to this? And I thought about that, and there's been a lot of I don't know, stones thrown at Donald Trump for his policy with Ukraine, for his policy, um, uh, his support of Israel in the wake of their conflict with Gaza, and not only that, I mean we have the domestic situation that's going back here in the United States, but we have to remember that we have to go back to what we know of Donald Trump intimately and what drives him, and also what we know of his first administration. And we know that he really wanted to get, there's a couple of things that we know. One, he wanted to remove all troops from foreign entanglements, from NATO to the Middle East to Asia, and he was unable to do so. We also know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we know that with the assassination of Suleiman, the leader of the IRGC, in his first term, that Trump was actually very much against that, and he only acceded to that assassination after a great deal of pressure from the Pentagon. And then to layer on top of that, we know that he was very concerned and very aware of the danger of nuclear war in his campaign. So I put all that together, and with his inability to withdraw the troops, he wrote an executive order after taking advice from Douglas Macgregor, and Douglas Macgregor, he said to Douglas Macgregor, who he had hired as the he tried to hire into his cabinet. Douglas Macgregor demurred and said, I don't want to deal with Senate hearings. And so Douglas Macgregor was a quote unquote advisor to the Secretary of Defense. And he asked Douglas Macgregor, how do I get these troops out? Douglas Macgregor said, you can only start with Afghanistan. You can only do one at a time. You can't take them all out of NATO and the bases around the world, but you could start with Afghanistan. So they wrote that order, and the Pentagon revolted and did not obey that executive order, which would ultimately lead to the disastrous pullout in the Biden administration. But you can begin to see if you begin to understand that nascence of the Afghanistan pullout, you could see why the Pentagon was waiting to see if Biden would maintain Trump's policy for pulling those troops out of Afghanistan. But so we know that Trump wanted to pull those troops out, was unable to do so. And we fast forward to then begin to understand in his second term that he can't just tell the Pentagon what he wants done. And so to that point, I begin to wonder if Donald Trump isn't playing the Ukrainians and the Israelis, because I've had this expectation. Douglas Macgregor also, when a Pentagon official asks him, well, what purpose does the military have? Douglas Macgregor had said, we have a changing landscape with regards to what war looks like today and what the capabilities of other nations are. And we have a porous border in the United States. And so we have massive insecurity within the country. So then I turn around and I look at Donald Trump's hard line that he's taken from the get-go in his administration with regards to immigration. And I say, oh, he's trying. Some people might say, well, why doesn't he take into consideration the pushback that he's going to get from Democrats and from the majority of the American people? Well, because he wants to bring attention to, in one manner, and also create a great alarm with regards to this, in some ways, real situation, real vulnerability that we have.
So putting the pieces together, Douglas McGregor told them if he wants to bring the troops home, there's got to be some sort of a thing that requires the troops to be on U.S. soil, and that's immigration. So this whole thing is to try to remove the U.S. from foreign entanglements.
Well, I think in part it is. I mean, I think the hard line with immigration and also some of the alarmism that the Republicans have been trotting out has been with an eye towards let's get if the Pentagon is going to come along with us, then we need to have a reason for being for the military, and if that reason for being is to come home and protect us at home, then we've got to make that case. So that continues to build. There's also we had the No Kings rallies.
These are massive. I mean, I've been looking at the pictures, and there's tens of thousands of people in the street all across the United States. So this is a big thing.
Well, and I think this speaks to who Donald Trump like maybe sees as his foe, because I don't think that he sees it as Israel or Iran or Russia. He certainly doesn't. He certainly doesn't see it as Russia, but he sees that the United States is being. I guess. I mean, my presumption is he took an understanding away from his first term in office that the United States was being used as the muscle, and the mind existed in some ways NATO, but in some ways the global corporations and global financial interests. So, and when I look at the backing for the No Kings rallies, I say, you know, one of the children of the Walmart scion, or Sam Walton, was one of the backers of this, and I think also global corporations who were threatened by Trump tariffs have been the backers of the No Kings rally. And we saw how this this narrative of Russian collusion and abuse of his office was used against Trump in his first term. I saw that as a return to that. But again, like, who's backing it? It would seem like the interest, and I think it's more than just BlackRock, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, to me, this also goes back to a noble class that exists in Europe. Those people who have continued to gain control, who run Europe through NATO, the auspices of NATO. Look at all of the look at all of the not in name only democracies that exist in Europe today: Romania, France, Germany, Great Britain. And I think that's where Trump sees the true problem, and so he is trying to look at and I say that with regards to Israel. I'm expecting that Donald Trump is participating, pushing back as much as he can with the generals, with the politicians in Europe, the Western powers, who are absolutely vehemently and I mean,
what's been the European response to the Israel's attack on Iran? I haven't had a chance to catch up on that. Has there been condemnation from most of Western Europe?
Oh no, they've been all about Israel's right to defend itself. And France and Macron said either last night or this morning that France was going to be providing aid to Israel in this fight against Iran. We know that there was a German tanker accidentally turned its transponder on. I believe it was German. Turned its transponder on over Iraq, and so we know that Western Europe has been. Finland is the only country that has spoken against Israel for the attacks. So Europe is offering what support that they don't have, because quite honestly they have liquidated all of their capabilities in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. I don't know if you heard what Vladimir Putin said with regards to Israel when with England when Keir Starmer said that England was going to be sending troops to help the Ukrainians, and and Vladimir Putin said, "Well, I guess I'll have to arrest them," which was hearkening to Otto von Bismarck, who, when the Kaiser Wilhelm, wanted to ramp up defense production leading into World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm didn't see these other countries as an issue, and so his response to Wilhelm's concern about Britain, he said, "Well, if they land on the North Shore, I'll have them arrested." But no, they are supporting Israel, and we also have to remember, going back to World War II, the enemies of the United States, or not the enemies, but those powers that the United States wanted to defeat immediately after World War II, were those countries that had empires, and they were in order of the power of the empire. We were concerned with Great Britain and France, and our claims on the debts that were owed to the United States through the Lend-Lease Act from Great Britain and from France. France refused to pay. Great Britain paid, but they held a chip on their shoulder, and it took them a long time to recover. But this narrative that Russia is our enemy and that we have a special relationship with Great Britain and France, Americans should be very wary of, because there's a much more complex history there. And there are those in Great Britain who blame the United States for the end of the British Empire, and they have had to maintain what control and benefits from that empire that they could through soft power and secret operations. And this is why the Great Britain relies so heavily on MI6 and on their false flag operations and their black ops from their military. So their special forces are known to be pretty good, but that's because they no longer have an empire to fund war at the level that they had prior to World War II. And we also have to remember too that the United States replaced or has a bad relationship with Iran at the behest of England. Or Great Britain, and after World War II, in the divvying up of Western Asia, Iran and all of Iran's oil were to be administered by Great Britain, and they began to push back, and they nationalized their oil interests, which led Great Britain to turning to, and I believe this is in 55, 56, somewhere around there, in 1956. They turned to the United States and said, "Would you help us destabilize and the regime and change the leadership there, so they will return the control of their oil supplies back to Royal Dutch Shell, our shell company, our Dutch shell company of British interests." So this is part of why Great Britain has such. I mean, it's also Great Britain that promises the land of Palestine to the Turks and to the Persians and to the Jews, and maybe to the Americans. I think there was somebody else that they promised it to, but made all these promises with regards to who was going to get to control the land of Palestine after World War II, and sets up this grand fight that we have on our hands today. So I think that Trump, long story short, I think that Trump has been very wary of not just the conflict that he had with the Pentagon, but also the deeper international ties that it has with NATO, with Great Britain, and with France, with Europe more broadly, and has been playing a longer game, which he might not foresee all. This might not be planned out, but I think that's who he has his eye on. who does not have America's interest in their mind, and who is using America, an American military, and the American dollar to their benefit.
So if Western Europe is largely voicing support for Israel, are they backing it up with actual money and munitions? Because I guess Western Europe now has two fronts as well, because if they're stepping in and saying that they're going to ratchet up their support for Ukraine in the war between Ukraine and Russia, and now we have Israel, Iran, and they're supporting Israel, then it sounds like Western Europe is gearing up for international war.
Well, Western Europe was to the point of asking Israel to send their Patriot missiles that they got in the early 90s to Ukraine. So Western Europe is essentially out of munitions. Like they're I mean, we also know that by and large the populations of European countries have been split, if not against both the Israel's actions in Gaza, as well as the conflict with Ukraine, and they may not support Russia or see Russia as a friend, but I mean, let's not forget too that Russia was supplying Western Europe with all of their energy needs prior to the United States blowing up Nord Stream 2. And saying, well, we'll furnish you with liquefied natural petroleum. So I don't know what support Western Europe has apart from refueling tankers. So
this is hollow support from Western Europe. They're not backing it up, or at least don't have the capacity to back up either of these conflicts.
Absolutely. Hollow support is the best way to put it. And this also, I mean, there have been questions as to why Russia has taken so long in the conflict with Ukraine to take over Ukraine, if they were so powerful, if they were such a larger country. And I would say that there were calculated reasons, like bleeding. Putin also looked at that and said, it's not any one president. It's not Joe Biden's war. It's not Donald Trump's war. It's not Keir Starmer. It's not Boris Johnson. It's not Emmanuel Macron. There is a hive mind here that persists beyond any one politician. And so in order to have real change, we're going to have to bleed them dry. And we're going to have to have some harsh realities. And so let's keep that off of our shores as long as possible. If it's in Ukraine, then that is a great tragedy. And I mean, you also look in Russia's narrative of what's going on in Ukraine, and they said, well, we're going to target military operators as much as possible, but we're not going to destroy. we're not going to do what Israel did in Gaza, and bomb the whole place into a lunar landscape. So, and which will be interesting because I think Iran is going to take the same line with Israel. And I've been interested, they bombed a couple of buildings, but that was because those buildings had defense capabilities that had part of the Iron Dome system on top of the building, or had had IDF headquarters, next door or inside. There's been a couple of others that were sent awry because of the electronic jamming of the precision guidance by the Israelis, but I don't think that Iran wants to destroy Tel Aviv. I think that Iran is going to be as precise and measured and targeted towards the government and also the IDF soldiers as possible, just like Russia has been in Ukraine. And I think that goes to them looking past the conflicts and saying, we've got to get Europe and the United States morally on our side. And so if we target as this person as our enemy, we play into their game, and we'll be setting ourselves up for a bigger battle in the future, in 30 or 40 years, whenever we've all rearmed, and we need to get away with that. We'll get away from that. And to that, I would say we should also go back and look at World War II. Americans have this rosy narrative that we were the great saviors in World War II, and we allowed that to poison our thinking coming out of the war, as if we won the war. And Russia said, we started fighting the German nationalists from the get-go, and we lost 20 million, and you lost 400,000. I mean, even the United States decision, and Ike Eisenhower says this, and Truman says this too. The decision to use nuclear weapons on Japan at the end of World War II, after the European theater had been won, was because the Russians were sending their troops to Japan. And Russia had said to the United States, Japan is our neighbor and our problem, and we want to go put them down so we do not have this issue in the future. And the day after Russian troops landed on Japan, the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs, in part as a message to Japan, but also as a greater message to Russia to say, hey, back off, this is our turf. And so this also led to the United States, this narrative of us as the great savior around the world. Well, in part that's true, but we also had ulterior motives, and so we need to have a reckoning with that, so that we can check ourselves and not be used as a host for nefarious organizations that operate around the world.
And as we think about the Israel-Iran conflict, we really do need to look broadly to what's going on in the entire global conflicts space, or it's like as far as what's happening globally, because the powers are aligning themselves, and it just doesn't look like Israel has a ton of support here if they can't draw the U.S. into it. So that's got to be one of their main goals here, or else they're going to find themselves running out of the ability to conduct this war.
There's also something in the narrative that I haven't, or in the words that are coming from, especially Professor Marandi, who's somewhat the voice of Iran to the Western audience, and he has repeatedly said, the family dictatorships that the United States has set up, or that the Western powers have set up to be their hedge around Israel, and also to be their puppets with regards to isolating Iran and Syria and Iraq, should be wary. And he talks at length about the small size of those countries, and he's talking about Jordan and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. And we should think about that here in the United States, and we should say, we have this narrative of how important democracy is and how terrible some of these autocratic leaders are. There was a time in which the West was a little bit shaken by MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the prince of Saudi Arabia, because he had Jamal Khashoggi's body sawn from limb to limb in a dismembered and put into suitcases and taken out of the Turkish embassy in Turkey, and we were a little bit put off by that, but we never questioned these democratic ideals that we have, and why there are so many kingships. As we had the No Kings rally here in the United States, in my mind, I was thinking, like, why don't we ever have this discussion about Saudi Arabia? Why don't we ever have this discussion about Jordan? And the truth is that the United States has paid off has long paid off, especially, go back to 1971 after France, our longtime enemy who hated us for the debts that we claimed to them after World War II, and were were very motivated to gain independence from the United States. Where did we run after that? We ran to these principalities in West Asia so that we could secure oil. And when we did so, we told them, as long as you play our game, then you will be rich and you will be in power. So again, going to this narrative of democracy, I mean, there's also a narrative that of democracy within Israel, but that has proved to be untrue. I wonder how democratic Iran, if we're honest with ourselves, how democratic Iran is comparatively to those other countries, and likewise Afghanistan. We're well over, and so we probably need to close it up. But I'll bring one other item of attention: India. India looks at Israel and looks at itself and has long said, well, we have the same problem. We have Islamic fanaticism to deal with. So I did see a report that India, Modi, the Prime Minister of India, flew to either Israel or Greece to have a meeting with Netanyahu. I'm not sure what's going to come of that. We've already seen Pakistan or Iran claim that Pakistan had offered up nukes to keep Israel at bay with regards to their nuclear capability. If Israel needs support and Western Europe has nothing to give, India will be their next option. So we should keep an eye with what's going on there. That's all I got.
We'll keep an eye on it and pray for de-escalation, but I think that that's got to be led by the U.S., as it's Trump that's continuing to call for peace talks. So we'll see what happens, but we'll check you next time on FOMO.